I never imagined that something as ordinary as my driveway would turn into a battleground. But that's exactly what happened the moment Karen from across the street decided my Jeep was no longer just mine. It began on a bright, calm afternoon, the kind where nothing dramatic ever seems to happen. Neighbors were chatting over fences, kids were riding bikes up and down the street, and everything felt routine. That sense of normalcy didn't last long. Karen had other ideas. She marched straight into my driveway with the confidence of someone who believed she already owned everything in sight. Without hesitation, and loud enough for half the block to hear, she announced that my Jeep should belong to her, or more specifically, to her daughter. I stared at her, genuinely convinced I must have misheard. But she didn't miss a beat. "You're giving my daughter that Jeep," she said, jabbing a finger toward my brand new Jeep Rubicon as if it were a community hand-me-down. "It's only fair. She needs it." I calmly explained that the Jeep was mine, registered in my name, legally purchased, and not going anywhere. Karen didn't care. She had already pulled out her phone and dialed 911, insisting that the police needed to come immediately because, in her version of reality, a crime was actively unfolding. Within minutes, the neighborhood buzzed with curiosity. Karen paced back and forth, phone pressed to her ear, dramatically rehearsing her story for anyone willing to listen. When the police finally arrived, I made a call of my own. What Karen didn't realize was that I wasn't just another Jeep owner caught off guard. I had connections, and her accusations didn't stand a chance. I calmly explained to the officers that the Jeep was mine, legally registered, insured, and fully documented. Then I casually added that the state attorney had personally reviewed everything. That was the moment her confidence cracked. Her eyes widened, and you could almost see her certainty collapse in real time. The officers stayed professional but firm, asking Karen to step back and allow the facts to speak for themselves. She tried to argue, stumbling over explanations that didn't make sense. Every claim she threw out was shut down by the paperwork in my hands, the same paperwork already approved by the state attorney. The irony was impossible to miss. She had arrived expecting a confrontation, but instead, she was faced with a legal reality she couldn't overpower. The Jeep remained right where it belonged, parked in my driveway, gleaming under the afternoon sun like it was mocking her entitlement. Karen eventually retreated, muttering something about next time, though everyone watching knew there wouldn't be one. As the police drove off, shaking their heads at the absurdity of it all, I realized this wasn't really about a Jeep. It was about boundaries, entitlement, and how far some people will go when they believe they deserve what isn't theirs. Karen's retreat didn't last long. By the very next morning, she was back, this time with a sharper glare and an even more aggressive sense of entitlement. She parked her car directly across my driveway, deliberately blocking my Jeep, sending a clear message that she believed she owned the street. If she couldn't own the vehicle, her daughter sat in the passenger seat, looking confused and uncomfortable, clearly dragged into a situation she didn't understand. It was obvious Karen wasn't just after the Jeep anymore. She wanted attention, control, and a public display of dominance. I stepped outside, calm on the surface, but fully prepared for the spectacle. "Good morning, Karen," I said, forcing a polite smile. She scoffed and ignored it completely. "This is my daughter's Jeep now," she snapped, as if repeating the lie enough times would make it true. She claimed the police hadn't stopped her before because they didn't see the bigger picture. I took a slow breath and held up my paperwork like a shield. The bigger picture was simple. The Jeep was registered to me, insured under my name, and every step I had taken was legal. I suggested she check with the state attorney before making any more accusations. Her jaw dropped. I could see the gears turning as she tried to process that she wasn't dealing with someone she could intimidate. Most people assume yelling and calling the authorities will eventually work. Karen had no idea. She was completely outmatched. She began muttering angrily under her breath, frustration spilling over. Then her daughter leaned forward and quietly said, "Mom, maybe we should just go." The contrast was striking, her daughter's calm logic against Karen's chaotic obsession. Karen wasn't finished. She stormed toward the front of the Jeep, trying to intimidate me physically. I stayed calm, letting the law and my silence do the work. Escalating would only help her narrative. and I wasn't about to give her that satisfaction. By now, neighbors were watching from windows and sidewalks, fully aware that something was unfolding. Karen's boldness was being exposed in front of an audience she hadn't anticipated. When she finally climbed back into her car, she was furious, but her daughter's expression said everything. Even she knew this was wrong. As Karen drove off, I knew this wasn't over, but any future attempt would meet the same wall of facts, documentation, and legal authority. What Karen didn't realize was that I had already anticipated her next move, and when she made it, it was going to shock her completely. A few days later, I spotted her lingering at the end of my driveway, phone in hand, clearly preparing to escalate again. This time, though, her plan was bolder than before. She didn't just want the Jeep anymore. She wanted to turn me into the villain, to twist the narrative until it worked in her favor. In her mind, all she had to do was push hard enough, and the story would bend to her will. What she didn't know was that I had already planned for every angle she could try. That afternoon, I was outside watering my garden when she marched up again, deliberately positioning herself to block my driveway like she owned the space. "I'm taking that Jeep for my daughter today," she announced, repeating the same demand as if sheer repetition could turn fiction into fact. Her voice was sharp and dripping with the kind of arrogance that comes from believing rules are optional. I calmly shut off the hose and turned to face her, keeping my tone steady and controlled. "Karen, you do realize that repeatedly trying to take someone else's property can carry serious legal consequences," I said evenly. "Especially when the state attorney is already aware of what you're doing." For just a moment, her face drained of color. Then she covered it with forced outrage. "You're bluffing," she snapped. "The law always sides with the mother." I smiled, because I knew the truth would hit harder than any argument. I opened the driver's side door of my Jeep and gestured toward the seat. "This Jeep is registered to me, insured to me, and your daughter does not need it. Not today. Not ever." As expected, Karen lost her composure. She started pacing back and forth, muttering threats under her breath, before pulling out her phone and calling the police yet again. What she didn't realize was that I had already contacted the local precinct ahead of time, explained her repeated attempts, and confirmed that the state attorney's office had full documentation supporting me. So when the officers arrived, Karen launched into her usual dramatic version of events, but this time, it went nowhere. They already knew the facts. Her words collapsed under the weight of evidence that was solid, verified, and impossible to dispute. The most unforgettable part was watching her arrogance crumble in real time. Neighbors lined the street, witnessing not just another argument, but a clear lesson in entitlement meeting the law. Karen's daughter stood quietly to the side, looking embarrassed yet strangely relieved, finally seeing that her mother's behavior wasn't just unreasonable, it was legally indefensible. When Karen retreated once more, muttering about "next time," a defeated villain in a bad soap opera, the Jeep remained exactly where it belonged. It sat in my driveway, shining under the afternoon sun, a symbol of preparation, patience, and authority. But Karen still wasn't finished. She had one final move planned, one last attempt that would test both her audacity and my patience. And when it came, it unfolded in a way no one saw coming. I sensed it before it even happened. About a week after her last failure, she showed up early in the morning, looking rehearsed and determined. This time, she wasn't just shouting or dialing the police. She wanted a scene big enough to pressure me into surrendering. I watched from my porch as she parked aggressively across my driveway, slammed her car door, and stormed toward me. "You really think you can keep this Jeep from my daughter forever?" she yelled, her voice shaking with anger and desperation. "I'm not leaving until you hand it over." I didn't flinch. I stepped forward calmly, keys and paperwork in hand. "Karen, this Jeep is mine. You've tried intimidation. You've involved the police. And you're still making the same mistake. There is no legal path that gives your daughter this vehicle." Her face flushed red with frustration. "You're lying," she shouted. "I've seen parents get things taken for their kids." I shook my head and let the silence hang for a moment before quietly calling the local precinct again. "She's here attempting to take my Jeep," I said. "Documentation is already on file with the state attorney. Please respond before this escalates." Officers arrived quickly. This time, Karen's confident facade completely collapsed. She waved her hands, tried to plead her case, but it was pointless. They had already been briefed. The paperwork, verified by the state attorney, was final. Her entitlement crashed headfirst into reality, and the outcome was inevitable. Seeing the moment, I added one last calm reminder. I opened the Jeep door and gestured inside. Everything here is legal. Nothing you say changes that. If you continue, you could face serious legal consequences. Her daughter sat silently in the car, eyes wide, clearly understanding the truth. Karen's defiance faded into disbelief. She muttered something about next time, but the entire neighborhood had already seen the collapse of her plan. As she finally retreated, it became clear this wasn't just a win over an overbearing neighbor. It was a lesson in boundaries, persistence, and standing firm against entitlement. The Jeep stayed right where it belonged, gleaming in the light, untouchable, a quiet reminder of how far some people will go when they believe they can take what isn't theirs. From that day forward, Karen never tried again. My driveway, my Jeep, and my peace remained untouched. Proof that preparation, calm resolve, and the law are unbeatable when faced with someone who thinks rules apply to everyone but themselves. If you enjoyed this wild Hoa-style showdown, don't forget to hit like, subscribe for more unbelievable real-life stories, and drop a comment telling me what you would do if someone tried to take your Jeep. Your support helps keep these outrageous stories coming.